this week, the EU opened investigations into Apple, Google, and Meta based on their non-compliance with the Digital Markets Act. So remember, we talked about the Digital Markets Act last year. It was actually last September we talked about it. This has since gone into effect. March of this year, the DMA went into effect in the EU. So remember, this is the thing that targets big tech companies, or the gatekeepers, as they call them so lovingly, companies that provide core platform services. So this was basically 6 major brands, 22 core platforms, things like Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, any big tech thing you can think of was grouped into this thing. And it's based on also then user count and revenue. So big things used a lot kind of got grouped onto this thing in the EU. And the intention here is that they're trying to stop big tech companies from cornering digital markets. They basically say they're trying to stop monopolistic behavior. So the EU has said that they've given these companies enough time to comply, but they now feel they need to be investigated for non-compliance. And specifically, the big contention with the Apple deal was that they were trying to, under the DMA's provisions, they needed app developers to be able to, or be allowed to, inform customers of cheaper purchasing options and direct them to those options. So this is a thing we've talked about a lot, where it's like, you've got to buy it through the App Store, you've got to buy this thing subscription. So they're like, we need application developers to be able to point you outside of that. Sort of the what was the gaming one that we had? The Fallout issue, where it was like, you had to, they wanted to buy it in
Epic Games,
Fortnite. Epic
Games.
Yeah, Fortnite, that was it. Yeah. So again, the fine for this, if you remember the fine for this? 10% of global revenue.
Right.
That is 10% of global revenue is what they want to leverage against Apple for violating what they're now saying is their rules. So this is in addition already to the EU already looking at Apple and already trying to leverage this exact same fine for not being able to switch browser or switch search provider. So they're trying to hit them on like multiple levels now. So what did Apple do? It seems like they kind of like proactively, I think, saw this coming, because 2 days before they announced this, Apple said, well, you know what? We're actually not going to roll out this new Apple Intelligence thing that we have just talked about at WWDC in the EU. We're also not going to roll out some features, the iPhone mirroring or the SharePlay features, explicitly, and they called this out because of DMA regulations. They said, specifically, we are concerned that the interoperability requirements of the DMA could force us to compromise the integrity of our products in ways that risk user privacy and data security. So they're basically saying, you're not going to get it because of these DMA rules. And maybe we'll roll them out at some point. They've said maybe we'll put them out in 2025. But clearly Apple's saying, we're not going to put these out in the EU because we don't think we can abide by these rules, and we don't want to risk 10% of our global revenue. So, what do you think about this? Do you think Google and Meta will take similar steps with this? Do you think they'll pull back on some of their things in the EU, or quit rolling things out in the EU? Is this a slippery slope for EU?
100% it's a slippery slope.
Not a leading question.
I said this last year, so
right?
Which I'm glad to see that they're doing it. And I don't think I'm the smartest guy on the planet. I think if you're running a company and someone says, "Hey, we're going to take 10% of your global revenue," they're going to try to take it. It's also adversely targets American companies, and I think the U.S. government should step in and go, "This has got to stop." Or Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg and all these guys happen to be at the restaurant at the same time and happen to sit at the same table at the same time and go, "Do you guys really want to be in the EU? Is that something we want to do?"
In the room where it happens.
And while they could vacation in Barbados, you may not be able to use an iPhone there. And I think this is a good move, because I think the governments are overreaching this at this point, where they're going to say, well, if it's 10% of global revenue and they agree to that, then the next fine, what is that? Does it go up to 25%? Does it go to 110% of global revenue? Like what?
I just think they keep just finding reasons to give them 10%.
Right, yeah.
Is it like once and you're done?
No.
Is that it? Or no, they're just going to keep going after it.
And so, like we said before, they said that if they agreed to this, we would be friends. They basically said that we won't come after you if you're friends. And I said the whole time, they're coming again. They're lying. And they were. And I think Apple's had enough. And they're just like, okay, I guess they don't want iPhones in there. And so if Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Apple all pulled out of the EU, I think they would say you have to be in the EU at that point, or we're going to sue you.
Can you imagine?
Right.
Like, we're going to sue you because you don't do business here and abide by our rules.
Right.
Because they would have to, right? Because it has to be. It's basically those services and these core things we're talking about are literal infrastructure things. They would come to a standstill if they couldn't use Excel.
Right.
Right? Like, if Microsoft pulled out and says, we're not going to support Excel in the country anymore, like, it would stop the EU. I think they have to. I think Apple are the first one just kind of like calling their bluff on this almost, just to say, like, you know what? We just won't roll this stuff out then. What do you think about that?
Okay. Yeah. Go use your Google phone, and then Google's going to say the same thing. 10% global revenue?
Right.
I don't think so, bro.
Yeah.
Like, that's really, I don't think that's happening. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, it's like blackmail. You know, okay, just pay me like $600 and I'm going to forget this information that I have. And I'll never come ask you for more money. That's never, ever, ever going to be the situation. No. They're going to come back and they're going to come back and they're going to come back and you're going to be paying them for the rest of your life. So like when you give in an inch, they're going to take a mile. And
I think they have to take a stand, don't they?
They do.
I think they have to take a stand against this. We said this last year. I explicitly said it's going to take one of these companies to like pick up their ball and walk home with it and say like, I'm not playing anymore. Like, and that's what it's going to take. And I think then the others will probably follow suit. I think this is Apple's first kind of like dipping the toe in that water by saying, well, we just won't release this feature. Like all this AI stuff and this like iPhone mirroring and this, basically the iPhone mirroring and the screen sharing part is because they know that it works iPhone to Mac only. Yeah. So therefore what's going to happen is somebody in EU is going to say, doesn't work on an Android. You can't have that feature. That's against, I think, give us 10%. It's like, that makes no sense.
We can't make it work on the Android.
It's the dumbest thing ever. It's so dumb. Right. It's just stupid. So I guess they're just going to choose not to roll out. What are we going to get? Like the EU version of Mac OS going forward? It's going to be Mac OS EU? Mm-hmm. Like there's going to be some horrible cut down 100%. Version with no features? Is that what we're going to get?
Do you think there's a scenario where Apple goes back and says, if you want the iPhone, it costs you this much EU?
To who? Like
they
to
call the government
consumer?
And say, if you want us in your market,
you
got to pay us 10% of global tax revenue.
I think, well, I do. Well, I wouldn't think that was, I think the EU's overestimating their power in this argument. Yeah. They are definitely overestimating. They think they have the upper hand here when I don't think they do. I think they're not realizing like, no. They don't have to be there. Yeah. They have literally the rest of the world. I get that it's one of the big 3 or 4 markets. I understand that. But that means there are 3 or 4 more. And all it takes is them to pick on Apple and then they start on Meta and then on Google. And then, I mean, imagine for phones, if they picked on both Apple and Google, what's the EU going to have?
So Google could fight and go, we're not licensing the OS to any manufacturer that sells in the EU. There would be no phones in the EU if they did that.
Yeah.
Right.
Unless they went to BlackBerry, I'm sure they would say, yeah, we would love to make some phones.
Nokia's sat on the sidelines now just like,
we got your back.
Please.
We got your back.
We'll bring that keyboard back right now.
And it's kind of, I think we were talking about this last year with the whole Canada like thing where Facebook was just like, fine, forget it. You know, we're not doing that. We're not paying you because like basically ad revenue for your website.
Right. Like, I would like to see the United States government sue a European company over similar rules. And like I said last year, sue them and say, hey, man, that OS in the car has to be interoperable, Mercedes, BMW. And I want 10% of global revenue if you can't do that.
And think about that, what you just said. It sounds ridiculous. Doesn't it? It's absolutely foolish, but it's the same thing. It is the same thing on the other way. It's the dumbest thing ever. You can't force this. You can't force this by these ridiculous fines because they'll just say, no.
10%. That is so much money.
Global revenue. Yeah. So revenue that you don't even get to participate in, you know, like.
Well, this is the thing, right? When you think about, you don't have to have much of a percent of literally the biggest companies in the world, do you? For it to be in the billions. Right. You really don't.
Yeah.
And we're talking about picking on the top companies in the world. like to try and get. It's just
Right.
it's a tax in disguise, because I guarantee you, EU consumers are like, please don't make Apple not give us Apple Intelligence. They're like, we want that. We need those features. We want those features. Don't make Meta pull out their features in our region, because that's what's going to happen. They are going to pull features away, and then the consumer's going to be like, EU, what are you doing? So they're going to get pushback from both angles, both from consumers and from the tech companies they're trying to leverage this against. They're going to get stuck in the middle here and kind of shoot themselves in the foot, I think.
Yeah. So my question is, what phones are the people who are making these decisions actually using?
You mean Ursula, the head of the EU? Ursula?
Right.
She's rocking an iPhone. You know she is. And Tim Scott isn't as vindictive as I would be. I would be highly upset. It's like, if that woman has an iPhone, cut it off right now. Like, turn it off.
Right. Shut it down.
Shut it down. So just tell her it broke. We don't know what happened. I don't know.
Sorry, you have Apple Care? I don't care.
know what
I'm
happened.
sorry.
Well, I don't know.
Go buy an Android. I don't know.
That's funny. And then Google's doing the same thing,
Yeah.
But I think this is what it's going to take. It's going to take them all kind of banding together, I think, which has never happened before. But I think we're going to kind of have that, I think, for this to go away. Otherwise, EU users are going to be like out in the cold.
And I'm going to say I disagree that it's never happened before, because all of these tech companies are currently fighting all of these individual state legislations as part of a conglomerate called NetSpark, I believe. So they are banded together like to fight legislation already, just right here in the United States, because, people like Utah decide to make really stupid laws that that have no technological soundness to them.
And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take them to do something like that and make what are really difficult decisions that are going to cost them a lot of money.
Yeah.
But you have to stand on it, I think. I think it's going to cost them money either way. They just have to make the decision: do we spend the money and get fined and then not know what's going to happen with that, or do we spend them or lose the money in another way and say we make a stand on this? Yeah. I think they have to make a stand. I think we're going to see an interesting year coming up as we see. I think more of these come in. I think this is just the
100%.
start.
Yeah.
I think every feature they roll out from here on in, they're going to have to consider, is that EU compliant or not? And when it's not, they're just going to say, well, we're just not going to bother. Yeah. And we're going to see it from the others. I think we have to see it from Meta and Google too, for it to really start to take effect. But we'll see. We'll see over the next 12 months.
And they're all American companies. The U.S. should step in and go, you can't tax them that way. They've got to do it. Like, and just tell them that's just wrong, because they're not doing it to the European.
But don't forget, the DOG is also going after them. Yeah. So we're doing kind of the same thing. Like,
we're allowed to spank our own kids, though.